Next speaker is Antonia Langenhoff from the University of California, Berkeley.
All right, great. Hi, everyone. Happy to be here. My name is Antonia. This is a project on the effects of disagreement on young children's overconfidence and information search. And it is another project with Jan Engelmann and my other advisor at UC Berkeley, Mahesh Srinivasan. All right, so Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman once said that if he had a magic wand that could change just one thing about human psychology, he would eliminate overconfidence. Why did he say this? Because the tendency to overestimate our own knowledge has been linked to a vast range of negative outcomes. For example, in the political domain, overconfidence has been linked to ideological extremeness and polarization. And another domain in which overconfidence can be harmful is learning. So learning involves the integration of new information, right? So someone who's not aware of the gaps in their knowledge and thinks they already know everything that there is to know might be less likely to seek and retain new information and also to revise their beliefs in light of new evidence. And indeed, research with older children and adults shows that those who tend to be more overconfident also tend to learn less. So overconfidence is present across the lifespan, as both Lydia and Daniel already mentioned, but those who are the most overconfident are typically young children. So they basically constantly overestimate their own beliefs. For example, 4 to 6-year-olds, they predict they will remember a lot more items from a list than they actually do, and children of the same age will also say that they are really sure about an answer that they essentially just guessed. But at the same time, young children are also, as we all know, incredibly open for learning, right? And they learn quickly and efficiently and a lot in little time. So given the negative association between overconfidence and learning that I just mentioned, this might seem a little bit surprising, right? So how can young children be such little know-it-alls and at the same time so open for learning? So the idea we investigated in this project is the following. So luckily, children don't live in a social vacuum. They are pretty much constantly surrounded by others, often more experienced others, like parents, teachers, older siblings, who can sort of help them understand when their confidence in their beliefs is appropriate and when it might be misguided. And specifically, we predicted that children might be or might quickly recover from their overconfidence when they experience that another person disagrees with them. And if you were at the pre-conference workshop on truth, lies, and misinformation during cognitive development on Thursday, you may have already heard me talk about this, so I apologize. But basically, the idea here is that disagreement really highlights the presence of alternative perspectives. And particularly during development, right, where children sometimes struggle with recognizing different perspectives, experiencing disagreement might help children to sort of take a step back from their belief and realize that they may have formed this belief sort of prematurely. So that was our first research question. Basically, we wanted to know whether experiencing disagreement as opposed to agreement might reduce overconfidence in 4 to 6-year-olds. And as a second research question, we also wanted to know how disagreement might affect children's information search. I'm sure all of you have had this experience before where you disagree with someone and sort of immediately upon realizing that the two of you disagree, you pull out your phone and you say, I'm going to Google that. And that's basically what we're trying to get at here. And we were also specifically interested in children's information search because prior work from the metacognition literature shows that there's this interesting contrast between so-called explicit and implicit measures of children's certainty or confidence. So specifically, young children often seem particularly overconfident when they have to make an explicit verbal statement about their own certainty. But when confidence is sort of measured more implicitly, young children often do seem to monitor their uncertainty and they also respond quite rationally to it. And one example of this is that young children are more likely to search for more information in situations of greater uncertainty. All right, so to investigate the effects of disagreement on both overconfidence and information search, we conducted 2 experiments. In experiment 1, we tested 68 children from the California Bay Area. They were between the ages of 4 and 6, and we basically presented them with a paradigm that looked roughly like this. So children and a confederate were asked to guess which types of toys would make a machine play music. And they had to do this after they were exposed to sort of limited and ambiguous evidence. I'll tell you in a second what exactly that looked like. And we got children to state their belief about which types of toys would make the machine play music first. And then we assessed children's confidence in this belief before and after the confederate either disagreed or agreed with children. And we also measured how children, and whether and for how long children would search for additional information about which kinds of toys would make the machine go. Okay, so a little more specifically, basically what we did, we had the child and the confederate, my wonderful RA, Enoch, you'll see him in a second, place 1 toy on the machine, and those 2 toys both happened to be blue squares. I sort of pulled them out of a box randomly. And they both activated the machine. And after that, I asked the child which types of toys they thought were blickets, blue toys or square toys. And I'm sure you all noticed this right away, but this question is basically impossible to answer based on the limited evidence that the 2 had just observed. But after I asked for children's belief, I also asked for their confidence in their belief. I asked them to rate, or I asked them to respond to the question, how sure are you? And we basically obtained their confidence on this 4-point scale, reaching from really not sure to really sure. And here's an example of what this looked like. I have a question for you now. Which toys do you think are blickets? Do you think square toys are blickets, or do you think blue toys are blickets? Blue toys. And how sure are you that blue toys are blickets? Are you sure or not sure?
Sure.
Sure. And are you a little sure or really sure? Really sure. Okay. Okay, that wasn't very loud, but I hope you all heard that she pretty confidently said really sure when she told me her belief here. And after this initial confidence assessment, depending on condition, the confederate either disagreed or agreed with the child's belief and then left. And after that, I assessed the child's confidence in their initial belief for a second time, using the same 4-point scale. And our idea was, right, that children in the disagreement condition would reduce their overconfidence in their belief more than children in the agreement condition. And then finally, to assess children's information search, we told them at the end of the study that the maker of the machine had hidden a toy in this box that was definitely and certainly a toy that would make the machine go. And if children really wanted to find out about the toys, they could go ahead and open the box, but they could also go and play with my fun marble run that I brought. And our idea was that children in the disagreement condition would search longer for additional information about their toys and sort of try to open the box, which this is a little bit mean of us, but we had taped up this box pretty good, so it was really hard to open. And here's what this looked like. She considers the alternative option, but then sort of persists here and kept on going. Okay, cool. So let's take a look at our results. First, children's confidence judgments. So this plot shows children's mean confidence ratings on the scale from 1, really not sure, to 4, really sure, on the y-axis, and then on the x-axis here you see the different points in time at which we assessed the confidence measurement, so before and after the disagreement or the agreement. And as you can see here, so at T1, children in both conditions expressed strong confidence in their beliefs, right? But from T1 to T2, confidence in the disagreement condition went down, and confidence in the agreement condition actually went up a little bit. Our pre-registered dependent measure here was the difference between T1 and T2, and as predicted, this difference was significantly larger in the disagreement condition than in the agreement condition. But as you can already see from looking at this graph, this effect was pretty small. More on that in a second. Let's look at information search next. So here you can see how many seconds out of the 2 minutes that we gave children in total, children spent trying to open this box that was taped up so well. And we found that children in the disagreement condition searched for 68 seconds on average, and children in the agreement condition for about 48 seconds, which was a significant difference. So taken together, what we found in study 1 was that disagreement, as opposed to agreement, reduced overconfidence in children, and it also promoted children's information search. So if you think about it, this effect on overconfidence specifically was really small. Children's confidence at T2 was sort of like still in the sure range here. And that's actually not that irrational. So children weren't too strongly affected by this disagreement by this confederate who, didn't really have an epistemic advantage over children, right? He basically just saw what they saw, observed the exact same evidence, and didn't really have a good reason for their opposing belief. And we wanted to change that in study 2. So basically what we did, we wanted to create a disagreement where the opposing belief of the confederate was a little more convincing. And we did that via an expertise manipulation, because we know that by this age, 4 to 6, children already know quite a bit about expertise and the division of cognitive labor. So we presented a novel sample of 68 Bay Area children with a paradigm that was basically identical to the one in study 1, except for one difference. So we turned Enoch Meyer-A into a Blickett, we talked about Blicketts, into an expert, someone who really knew a lot about the toys in the box. So basically what I said, look, Enoch here knows a lot about the toys. He knows more about them than anyone else I know. And that was it. And of course we did that in both conditions. And here is what we found in experiment 2. So first, children's confidence ratings again. This is, again, their confidence ratings before and after the disagreement. And again, before the disagreement or the agreement, confidence was pretty high in both conditions. And then after the disagreement or the agreement, we saw that confidence in the disagreement condition went down and in the agreement condition went up. This is, again, a significant difference. And when we compared the difference scores across experiments, we found that this was a larger effect than the one in study 1. Regarding children's information search, we again found that children in the disagreement condition searched longer than children in the agreement condition. This time, this was actually an interaction effect with children's age. So super briefly, basically what we found is that this interaction was mostly driven by older children searching less long in the agreement condition, but importantly, right, as you can see here, across ages, children searched longer in the disagreement condition. So to conclude, our findings from study 1 and 2 together show that disagreement, especially with an expert, can lead children to reduce their overconfidence and also to search for additional information. And these findings are in line with our prior and ongoing work, showing that experiencing disagreement facilitates children's intellectual humility more broadly. And it suggests that although we may often think of disagreement as something that's kind of has a negative connotation, it can also be something really, really helpful, especially when it's constructive disagreement, where two people sort of disagree on an equal level. Especially during cognitive development. To sort of finish it up, I know that there are a lot of outstanding questions. One important thing to ask is what, if anything, makes disagreement special, right? So one option, and we've heard a little bit about this in the previous talks, is that it might be that it's specifically the social nature of disagreement that leads children to reduce their overconfidence here and make more sound and intellectually humble judgments more broadly, which would fit really well with recent views showing that sort of human rationality is at its best in social contexts. And then a second, maybe slightly less exciting option is that disagreement highlights different perspectives, as I mentioned in the beginning, but that sort of similar situations where we highlight alternative or contrasting perspectives in a non-social way would have similar effects on children. And whether or not that's the case is an empirical question. I'm currently trying to figure out how to test that, which is kind of challenging. So if anyone has a good idea, let me know. But I think even if the latter option turned out to be the case here, it would still be exciting, and it would still show us that disagreement is special in some sense, because disagreements are frequent in children's experiences. Anyone who has siblings like me will know that. And then the other thing is that I think, especially at times like today, where societal division and polarization are sort of at all-time highs, it is extremely important to remember how to respond to disagreements in constructive and intellectually humble ways. So with that, thank you very much for listening, and I want to thank everyone who was involved in the project. Thanks.
Thank you, Antonia. Yes.
Thank you, very nice talk. I was wondering whether you can comment a little bit about the educational implications of your work. So in North America in particular, there is this trend of raising children who are very overconfident, right? So we want our children to be confident in their abilities and search for knowledge. So you are kind of proposing here a different strategy of increasing children's knowledge seeking.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Thank you, and definitely something I've been thinking about a lot. Even as a German moving to America for my PhD, I've noticed that difference in children. I think, and. I don't know if you saw, but we do find an effect of agreement in our experiments as well, right? We're sort of like framing it from this angle of disagreement, but there is this bump in confidence as well. The mic just died. Can you still hear me? Oh, good, okay. That we observed here. So I think on the one hand, children's overconfidence or like being very confident, and it's sometimes a little difficult to distinguish, but it's something that is also very important and can be adaptive and that we do want to foster as well, but maybe not in all kinds of situations, and maybe especially not in situations where we're sort of like trying to come to a joint decision about something in a decision-making process together with others. So I think it's important to keep both of these things in mind, but also to sort of really highlight that sometimes it's fine to sort of take a step back and say, yeah, actually, maybe I didn't have enough evidence for this conclusion that I came to, and maybe I do need additional evidence, and so on and so forth. So maybe they go together.
Thank you for a great talk. I would like to agree with you that what disagreement is doing is sort of generating some curiosity, but I wonder if, there could be other reasons why children then are exploring after the disagreement. So do you have any sort of more direct evidence that the disagreement is actually leading to this curiosity to recheck my assumptions about what the objects are doing, and even sort of comparing a disagreement situation with a negative evidence situation in which it's not that somebody is disagreeing with me, it's just that I got some negative evidence that my previous assumptions were wrong.
Yeah, great point, thank you. I don't have direct evidence from this study. One thing that I always like to mention when I talk about this is that, so originally when we had planned the study, we had sort of thought of ending the study after this information search phase. And that totally didn't work. I ran all of the data, and children weren't like satisfied, right? They wanted closure, even after the 2 minutes of searching for additional information were over. And they came to me and they didn't say, I don't know, maybe they could have said something like, I want to show everyone that the toy in here is a blue toy or something, and that would sort of, maybe then we could think maybe they just wanted to show that they were right, which is not what I suggested, right? I suggested this sort of intellectually humble explanation. But what children did in our studies is that they came to me and said, but I want to know what's in there. So there was this epistemic motivation to really get closer to the truth, at least, I like to interpret it that way. I think it would be cool to sort of measure that more explicitly in future studies. So yeah, that's the little piece of information I have here. And then in terms of you mentioned, it could also just be about getting additional evidence. What we really tried in this study, and we have other studies where it's a little bit different, but we really tried to, not change anything across the two different conditions, but the fact that the confederated either disagreed or agreed. So there was just sort of like what happened is they highlighted the alternative hypothesis. When, in a way, maybe you can even think of that as additional evidence. But they really didn't say anything beyond that, right? They literally just said, I agree or I disagree, and that was it. So yeah, maybe, I don't know if that's helpful, but that's how we did in the study.
One last question at the back.
I don't know whether I missed your results or not. So did you compute the correlation between information seeking time versus the confidence rating time 1 and time 2?
Up there. Sorry, I was so busy trying to find you that I totally didn't listen to your question. Could you say it one more time?
Right here, but they were way back.
Yeah.
Okay, so have you computed the correlation between information seeking time and T1 or T2 confidence rating?
Yeah, that's a great question, and also something that we did. And we didn't find any connections there, which is interesting. And so I'm sort of still trying to figure out what that might mean. On the one hand, you might have expect that children, for example, who were less overconfident, or let's say who were less confident at T2 after the disagreement, were also the ones who searched longer, right? But we don't see that in our data, which might be partly because it's not the biggest sample or, whatever, and we're sort of splitting the sample in half here. But I think also partly might speak to that dissociation between, children's explicit overconfidence or how they report their certainty, and then what children do in their behavior and how they sort of like express their behavior, their confidence behaviorally. So could look at age effects there. I wonder, for example, if the younger kids were the ones who were still really overconfident even after the disagreement, but then maybe there we would see the effect on information search, and maybe it might be different in the older kids, the 6-year-olds, who are already a little bit better at judging their uncertainty in these explicit verbal ways. And I haven't looked at that yet, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Antonia, for the very interesting talk.